11:45 p.m. Vance Tower, 72nd floor. The brilliant lights of Manhattan stretched out below like a map studded with diamonds. Inside the luxurious penthouse with high ceilings, marble floors, and Italian leather furniture, Alexander Vance sat alone at the bar, a glass of 25-year-old Macallan whiskey in hand. He was the epitome of success, a self-made white billionaire CEO of Vance Capital, a man whose touch turned everything to gold. But his eyes weren't exactly smug. They were empty. Behind him, music from the party still played the guest list, packed with big names in finance media and fashion people accustomed to power and the kind of sugar-coated deceit that came with it. Alexander wasn't drunk, but his mind drifted not from alcohol, but boredom. Everything in his life seemed to run so smoothly that it had become meaningless. Still, the same arrogant Alexander Vance I know. The voice cut through his thoughts. Marcus Alden, longtime friend and rival, set his glass on the bar, eyes gleaming with mischief. Alexander smirked, still trying to poke holes in my perfect image. Not poke, Marcus replied. Just challenge it a little. Alexander narrowed his eyes. What kind of challenge? Marcus lowered his voice like he was sharing a state secret. You've got everything. Money, power, women, status. But when was the last time you were shocked? Alexander leaned back, lips curling into a smile. Surprise is for the weak. I built my life by controlling every variable. Exactly. Marcus nodded. And that's why you're drowning in your dull perfection. Alexander frowned. That wasn't a lie. And that irritated him. So, what do you propose? He asked, his voice calm, but his eyes more alert now. Marcus set his glass down, turning fully to face his friend. I bet. You can't maintain a real marriage not with the type of woman you usually date, but with someone completely outside your world. A woman you can't buy, can't manipulate, and can't understand. Alexander burst out laughing, the sound echoing through the space. A new kind of game. Sounds reckless. Not just a game. The ultimate test. If you're unmatched like you think you are, you'll pull it off. Alexander twirled the glass in his hand, his eyes gleaming like a wolf catching the scent of blood. Details. Marcus smiled. Marry a black woman. Not from the elite class. Not conventionally beautiful, by high society standards, not seduced by wealth. You'll live with her for 6 months without control, without manipulation. And if she leaves you before the term ends, you lose. Alexander raised an eyebrow, but remained composed. And the prize, Marcus lifted his glass. I'll invest $50 million into any social project of your choosing, so you can prove your ability to bridge class divides. And if I lose, Marcus smirked. I'll go public with the fact that Alexander Vance, the man who's never known failure, was defeated by a woman outside his world. A few seconds of silence passed. Alexander looked down at Manhattan, then back at Marcus, his eyes flashing with challenge. Deal. He extended his hand. The two men shook on it in silence, louder than any music playing beyond those walls. But at that very moment, Alexander didn't yet know. The woman about to enter his life wouldn't just make him lose a bet. She would shatter the gilded mirror he had stared into for 43 years. 3 days later, inside the executive office of Vance Capital, where $100 million deals were sealed with a nod, Alexander Vance sat in front of his computer screen, with an expression few had ever seen on him. Confusion. A long list of women's profiles was hand-picked on the screen by his assistant Sophia Lang, based on the criteria outside the standards of the elite, but smart enough to survive in your world. Each name passed like a venture capital portfolio. Elementary school teachers, street artists, librarians. but none made him pause until the 27th name. Kiara Monroe, director of the nonprofit Light Up, age 35. Education Masters in Sociology. Focus, housing support and skill training for low-income communities. Status, single, hometown, Bronx, New York. An attached photo appeared, a black woman with naturally curly hair, tied up sharp yet composed eyes, and a smile that showed no hint of fear, completely unlike the sugary, polished look Alexander was used to in his past relationships. "She's not your type," Sophia remarked, noticing his gaze lingering. "Exactly," Alexander replied. "And that's why I'm choosing her." The next day, 10:00 a.m., at the modest but orderly headquarters of the Light Up Foundation, Kiara Monroe sat amid stacks of housing aid applications, unpaid electricity bills, and rejection letters from major corporations. She had just finished organizing the paperwork when her phone buzzed an email from Office of Vance. Capital subject: potential partnership, in person. Meeting with CEO Alexander Vance. Content: we are impressed by the community work of your organization and would like to discuss a long-term development support project. Kiara frowned. Vance Capital, one of the coldest firms on Wall Street, was now taking an interest in a small nonprofit like hers. Something felt off. However, her upcoming housing project was on the verge of being canceled due to a lack of funding. If this was real. That afternoon, 72nd floor conference room, Vance Tower. Kiara entered, dressed in a simple black dress and worn shoes. Her hair was tied up neatly, her face bare of makeup. She didn't glance at the cityscape through the glass. She came to talk, not to admire. Alexander stood up and extended his hand. "Thank you for coming. Miss Monroe." "Just call me Kiara," she replied, shaking his hand with a firm grip that caught him off guard. "Honestly, I didn't expect the CEO himself to be present." Alexander smiled. "I care about things that have real impact." "Is that so?" Kiara responded with a slight tilt of her head. "Sounds more like a PR line than something sincere." Alexander froze for a beat. She had touched what he usually kept hidden, the gap between image and essence. They sat down and began the meeting. Kiara presented the projects. Light Up was working on vocational training for single mothers, temporary housing for homeless teens, and weekend classes for students who had dropped out of the education system. Alexander listened, or pretended to, but his mind was racing. In reality, how to make a marriage proposal without making her laugh or walk out immediately. At the end of the meeting, he exhaled lightly and looked her straight in the eye. "Kiara, I have an unusual proposal, but if you accept, your organization will have stable funding for at least 5 years. You mean a sponsorship contract?" Alexander shook his head. "I mean marriage. To me, for 6 months. Silence fell over the room. Kiara narrowed her eyes. She didn't laugh. She didn't get angry. She just analyzed. Is this a game? Or are you trying to buy a humanitarian image for media optics? Alexander tilted his head, arrogant gaze intact. "I see an opportunity. You need funding. I need a public image of someone who understands compassion. Mutual benefit." Kiara stood up and picked up her bag. "I need time to think. And if I agree, I set the rules." Alexander nodded. "I like someone who knows their terms." She paused at the door and turned her head. "You don't know me yet, Mr. Vance. And if this is a game, ensure you're ready when the rules change." Alexander gave a faint smile as she walked away. But what he hadn't realized was this. This was no longer just a bet. This was the first time someone didn't step into his world. She came to rebuild that world from the ground up. 3 days later, Kiara's office in the Bronx community. It was drizzling outside, the old tin roof above her dripping softly onto the misted window pane. Kiara sat motionless at her worn wooden desk, a financial report in front of her. but her eyes weren't reading a single line. Alexander's words still echoed in her mind, like ink slowly bleeding through paper. Marry me. For 6 months. I'll fully fund your organization. As an independent woman who had overcome scorn, racial discrimination, systemic violence, and countless empty promises, Kiara Monroe had never traded her dignity for an opportunity. But this time, the numbers in the report were terrifying. They were about to shut down 3 essential programs. She knew if she declined, hundreds of families would lose their lifeline. But if accepted, she'd enter the artificial world she had always despised. That evening, Kiara called her longtime mentor, Lorraine Evans, who had guided her since her internship days. I'm facing a crazy offer, Kiara said, half joking, half troubled. How crazy? Lorraine asked. Marry a white billionaire for 6 months in exchange for a huge grant. Lorraine was silent for a moment. Then she spoke gently, but with steel beneath her words. The question isn't, should you accept it? But if you do, can you stay true to yourself? The next morning, 9:00 a.m., at a cafe near Vance Capital. Kiara arrived early, not because she was eager, but because she wanted to be in control. Alexander walked in at exactly 9:01. He wasn't wearing a suit, just a gray sweater. His hair was slightly unkempt, as if trying to appear normal. But his presence still screamed veteran CEO. Kiara set her coffee down and looked him dead in the eyes. Before you say another word, let me make this clear. I will not be a decorative piece at your galas. I won't smile and stand behind you shaking hands with fake donors. And you have no right to control my life. Alexander smiled slightly. I like your directness. She continued cold and firm. If I agree, I live on my terms. I will continue running my organization. I won't move in with you unless I choose to. And all funding goes directly to the community, not into Vance Capital's PR pocket. Alexander leaned back and crossed his arms. You negotiate like a real CEO. No, I'm a community defender. I don't need power. I need justice. Alexander nodded. So, do we have a deal? Kiara stared at him, eyes filled with skepticism. We have an experiment. Nothing more. She reached out her hand. Alexander took it, warm hand but a firm grip. The deal was struck without a single contract. 1 week later, headlines swept the news outlets. Billionaire Alexander Vance announces surprise marriage to Kiara Monroe, an unknown but bold social activist. The media was stunned. Social media erupted in the debate. Who is she? Cheap PR stunt. What black woman dares to step into the world of the ultra-rich? Meanwhile, in a humble tailor shop in Brooklyn, Kiara tried on a simple white wedding dress she had chosen, refusing all stylist offers and luxury brand suggestions from Alexander. It's not that I hate looking beautiful, she told Lorraine as she helped button the dress. I just don't want to look beautiful like they want me to. The wedding took place 10 days later in a private rooftop garden of Vance Tower. There are no brass bands, no guests from Kiara's side, only elite attendees, their scrutinizing eyes hidden behind polite smiles. Alexander, in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, looked like a frozen prince. Kiara walked forward, sunlight gently touching her deep brown skin. No makeup. Eyes never blinking once. When the officiant declared, I now pronounce you husband and wife, the crowd clapped, except Kiara. She clenched her hand tightly and whispered to herself, no one controls me, not even you. But from afar, Marcus Alden stood among the guests wearing a knowing smile, because he understood the game had only just begun, and Alexander Vance was about to learn a lesson he couldn't buy with all the money in the world. Wedding night, Vance Tower, Manhattan. The penthouse spanned over 600 square meters, bathed in warm golden light and soft piano music flowing from a hidden sound system. Everything was perfect, to the point of lifelessness. Italian leather chairs, Persian rugs, oak wood floors. But amid all that grandeur stood two people bound by a fabricated agreement, both avoiding eye contact. Alexander poured himself a drink, leaning against the glass wall and gazing at the skyline. Kiara placed her wedding bouquet on the table and carefully removed her worn, low-heeled shoes. "Do you live in a museum or something?" she asked, not sarcastically but coldly enough to establish distance. Alexander turned around with a shrug. "I'm used to spaces that are orderly." "Orderly or isolated?" Kiara shot back, locking eyes with him for only 2 seconds. They didn't have dinner together. There was no wedding cake, no dancing. After a few quiet, obligatory exchanges, Kiara walked into the guest bedroom without asking. She rolled in her suitcase and began hanging her clothes, mostly old shirts, jeans, and a few running shoes. Alexander stood in the doorway for a while before saying, "You're not planning to stay in the same room?" Kiara didn't turn around. "You said we're married, not living like it," he chuckled. "You're making this more tense than it has to be." She turned her head, her gaze sharp as a blade. "I'm trying to honor the agreement, not cross lines. You're used to being in control. I'm not someone used to being controlled." Alexander stayed silent. This was the first time he didn't win a negotiation. Kiara would leave the penthouse early in the morning in the first days after the wedding. She attended the Light Up Center, had lunch with volunteers, taught skill-building classes, and worked with homeless teens. She returned only in the evening, tired, quiet, avoiding the living room. Alexander, on the other hand, continued living like a solitary emperor. Meetings, galas, book launches, cocktail networking events. But every time he returned home, the penthouse felt different. No longer the silent haven he once loved. There was soft jazz playing in the living room, the smell of freshly brewed coffee, a coarse fabric coat draped over a leather chair. He wasn't used to it, but he didn't hate it. He just didn't understand it yet. Saturday night, Alexander hosted a wine party. Though it was a small gathering, over 30 guests showed up: investors, models, indie film directors, and state-level politicians. All came to meet the mysterious wife Alexander had just married. Kiara emerged from the private elevator, wearing a plain black dress, no makeup, and hair tied high. She was like a low note amid a noisy orchestra. Precisely because of that, every eye turned to her. A blonde woman approached. "Are you?" His assistant, Kiara, smirked. "No, I'm his wife." The woman's face froze before she quickly backed away. Alexander observed from a distance, his expression unreadable. When he approached Kiara, he whispered, "You don't have to stay, if you're uncomfortable." "Why am I embarrassing you?" she asked, her gaze full of challenge. "No," he said slowly. "You're making them unsure of how to react. And I've never seen anyone do that before." At midnight, the party ended. When Alexander stopped her in the kitchen doorway, Kiara changed clothes and was about to return to her room. "Why did you agree to this marriage?" he asked. She looked at him, unflinching. "Because I have 168 families who need housing. Because 3 10-year-old boys are studying under streetlights. Because I'm willing to endure your suffocating world, if it helps save my smaller one." He didn't respond. She continued, "But don't get it twisted, Alexander. I didn't marry you. I married the resources you represent." Then she walked past him quietly, adding one last line. "I'll keep my word, but don't mistake the roles." As the living room door closed behind her, Alexander stood still in the kitchen. For the first time in his life, a woman didn't need him, didn't fear him, and didn't want him. And that kept him awake all night. Week 2 of the contractual marriage. The luxury penthouse remained untouched in its perfection. Crystal glasses lined up neatly in glass cabinets. Fresh flowers replaced each morning, and gourmet dinners prepared by a private chef that no one ever touched. Alexander Vance continued to live up to the standards society expected of him. The elegant CEO, the financial titan, orchestrating brilliant acquisitions. He graced the cover of Forbes' delivered speeches at the Davos conference and maintained the calm demeanor of a man with the world in his hands. But each time he returned home at night, the silence was unnerving. Kiara had wordlessly divided the space with silence boundaries and a presence so commanding that anyone entering a room unconsciously adjusted their posture. She didn't complain. It didn't make noise. She didn't try to be friendly, which made her unreadable to Alexander. One night near midnight, Alexander paced the living room. He couldn't sleep. He opened the balcony doors and stared out over Manhattan, glittering with lights. Behind those windows were people loving, hating, betraying, but at least they felt something. And him. His marriage felt like a no-interest transaction. No greetings, warmth, or returns. He walked back into the living room. On the table was a stack of documents from Light Up. Curious, he flipped through them. A report documenting homeless children in the Bronx. A list of families evicted due to rising rent. A handwritten letter from an 8-year-old girl addressed to Kiara Miss Monroe. Thank you for the warm blanket. I'll study hard so I can help others one day. Alexander froze. The letter wasn't printed nicely. No logos. Not posted on social media. But it made him feel small. The next morning, Kiara woke up early as usual. When she entered the kitchen, she found Alexander sitting at the table still in his pajamas, with the Light Up report from last night open in front of him. He didn't look up. You read all of this every day, he asked. That's my job, she replied without pause. He was silent for a moment, then asked again. How do you deal with it? Reading such painful things every single day. Kiara placed the coffee pot on the stove, poured it into her ceramic mug, and answered slowly. Because I know if I don't read them, no one else will. And if no one reads them, no one will act. Alexander remained silent for a long time. Part of him admired her. Another part felt ashamed. Another evening, Alexander came home earlier than usual. Kiara was sitting on the living room floor gluing flyers for a fundraising event. Need help? He asked a bit awkwardly. Kiara looked up surprised. You know how to use glue? He sat down, taking off his coat. As long as it sticks something together, right? She shrugged and handed him a few sheets. They sat facing each other, no more words. The sound of paper rustling, the faint scent of glue, and warm light spilled across their faces. For the first time, there was no challenge between them. Just silence, not cold, but the kind of silence shared by two strangers learning how to coexist in the same reality. The next morning, Alexander received an email from Marcus. How's the deal going? Has she melted yet? I'm planning a ski trip. Bring your unconventional wife so we can check your progress. Alexander didn't reply. For the first time, he wasn't sure this was still a game. That night, Alexander walked past Kiara's room. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, she was sitting by the window, moonlight casting down on the book in her hands. The Souls of Black Folk, W.E.B. Du Bois. He wanted to knock. I wanted to ask what she was thinking. But instead, he just stood there for a few seconds. Then they quietly walked away. Because for the first time in his life, Alexander Vance felt like an outsider in his own home. And the woman he once saw as a mere tool for a bet was now making him question something he'd never dared ask. If she doesn't need me, then who am I? Saturday, 8:00 a.m. A message appeared on Alexander's phone as he sipped espresso by the penthouse window. Kiara, 10 a.m. Light Up Center. We're distributing food and winter supplies today. If you want to understand me, be there. No greeting, no emoji, no pleasantries. Just a simple invitation like a test. And Alexander sensed there were no bonus points for pretending. 9:58 a.m. The Bronx south side of the city. The gleaming Bentley pulled up in front of an old building, its walls painted with graffiti art, two outstretched hands cradling laughing children. Alexander stepped out of the car, his polished shoes meeting cracked pavement and patchwork sidewalks filled with weathered cement. Hip-hop music blared from an upstairs apartment. The smell of frying food, cigarette smoke, and life hit him directly. He felt out of place. The expensive gray suit and Italian shoes drew every eye. Children stopped playing soccer. An older man nodded slightly. No smile. A middle-aged woman glanced at him and shook her head, as if she knew why he was there, just by how he walked. Inside, the light-up center. The space was barely 200 square meters. Rows of old wooden tables pushed together stacked with food boxes, winter coats, and freshly washed blankets. A group of volunteers was chatting cheerfully as they sorted supplies. At the center of it all, Kiara, wearing a navy t-shirt, hair tied up, and a handwritten paper name tag. Miss Kiara, I'm here because of you. She was helping a frail older woman find shoes that fit when she looked up and their eyes met. Alexander nodded. Kiara didn't smile, but she gestured for him to come closer. You showed up, she said quietly. You told me to come if I wanted to understand, he replied. Kiara handed him a cardboard name tag written in thick black marker. Mr. Alexander, Food Station C. Follow Dana. She'll show you what to do, Kiara said, then turned away. No compliment. No easing him in. Alexander exhaled, then stepped inside where the scent of sweat and gratitude blended like an unfiltered song. For 3 straight hours, Alexander carried food boxes, sorted milk, and packed dry beans. Sweat dripped from his brow onto his collar. Dust stuck to his hands. A 6-year-old boy asked if he was a doctor from TV because he was white and dressed nicely. Alexander laughed for the first time that day. He helped a single mother load supplies into her car. She didn't thank him. She said, "You're not the type that usually shows up here." 11:47 a.m. He returned to the distribution tables. Kiara was crouched beside a child teaching him how to fold a sweater for his mom. She didn't notice him watching, but he couldn't take his eyes off her for 3 minutes. Something in the way she bent down, the way her hands gently lifted the sweater from the child's, made the entire world Alexander had built with power feel hollow. Noon. Kiara handed him a water bottle and a cold sandwich. No smoked salmon, just vegetarian pâté. Alexander took it. Not a single complaint. Now tell me, Kiara said, bracing her hands on the table. What does it feel like for a king to step into the land of the poor? Alexander looked around. Children were playing with empty milk cartons. An older man was dozing in the corner. A skinny young man helped elders carry bags to the door. For the first time, Alexander said slowly, I didn't feel like the center of the room. Kiara looked at him. She didn't speak, but in her eyes something flickered, something he hadn't seen once in all the days they lived together. Respect. Just a bit. But it was real. As they cleaned up that afternoon, Alexander stood in front of the hand-painted mural outside the center. Kiara walked up, placing her hand on the faded paint. The kids painted this themselves. Not professionals, but it's theirs. Alexander looked at her. And I'm stepping into a world that doesn't belong to me. Kiara turned to him. No one said you couldn't enter, but if you stay, understand this. You're not a savior here. You're just someone learning. On the drive home inside the silent car, Alexander stared out the window. Old storefronts, stoplights, graffiti, honking cars, things he'd never paid attention to before. Kiara said nothing. She was tired, but for the first time, she didn't completely lock him out. She left the door slightly ajar. And Alexander knew today he hadn't won, but he hadn't lost either. He had stepped into the real arena, where reputation didn't matter, only humanity did. 3 weeks after the food distribution, Kiara's quiet resolve had begun to spread like an invisible magnetic field. No sermons, no spotlight, but enough to make Alexander's behavior at parties, conferences, and galas feel suddenly forced. He stood in crowds, smiled on cue, and raised his glass when required. But in his mind was the image of a small boy at the light-up center, handing his last cookie to his younger sister, a lesson in generosity no Harvard Business School syllabus had ever taught. Thursday night, Alexander was hosting a cocktail party on the rooftop of the Veldon Hotel, bringing together the entire Vance Capital Executive Board, several Wall Street power players, and representatives of Asian investment firms. And this time, Kiara was required to attend. Alexander was clear. This is a strategic gathering. You need to be there. Your presence sends a message. What message? Kiara asked, her disdain unhidden. I'm not just some soulless finance robot, he replied with a forced smile. So what do you want me to do? Stand beside you. Smile. Just enough. Nod politely when they say I'm inspiring and strong. Kiara. Alexander sighed. I just need you to come. Please. It was the first time he used the word please. She nodded. Not for Alexander, but for her community. She is currently in negotiations for an educational support fund partially backed by Vance Capital. That evening, Kiara stepped into the main hall wearing a simple navy blue dress, no designer label, no diamonds. But the way she walked steady, needing no introduction, made the room pause for a few seconds. Alexander approached and whispered, "You look beautiful." She didn't thank him. I replied, "I didn't come to be a decoration." An hour later, Kiara found herself wedged between two women. One was the daughter of a diamond mining tycoon. The other is the wife of a state senator. They were sweet-polished and subtly cutting. "You work in the community?" one asked. "That's admirable. Though I imagine quite stressful." "Not as stressful as sitting through people subtly mocking your work while smiling through it," Kiara replied. The second woman laughed awkwardly. "We're just curious. How did you meet Alexander? You two seem so opposite." "We are." Kiara sipped her water. "We're two suns, and only one of those suns shines light on others." The table went quiet. Alexander heard about the exchange. After the party and the car ride home, he confronted her. "You left everyone speechless at that table. What were you trying to prove?" "I'm not a wooden statue in a dress standing beside you," Kiara answered. "This is PR, a chance to expand funding for your programs." "No," she looked directly at him. "It's a chance for you to polish your image. Don't confuse it with genuine compassion." Alexander let out a bitter laugh. "So what am I to you? A money-hunting machine with no soul?" "No," she replied, eyes unflinching. "I think you're someone who's never had to face the fact that you felt nothing for most of your life." Silence, tense as a pulled bowstring. Then, for the first time, Alexander shouted, "I built this empire with sweat, blood, and sacrifices you couldn't possibly understand. I don't need anyone's pity or a lecture on how to grow a heart." Kiara didn't flinch. Her voice was low, but sharp enough to pierce through every layer of his defense. "You think I pity you? No. I'm just disappointed. Because for a moment, I thought I saw someone beneath that suit. But it turns out, it's still just a shell. Polished better than most, but still hollow." She opened the car door and stepped out onto the street. No driver, no apology. Just her walking alone under the rain, leaving Alexander Vance stunned and speechless. For the first time, his rage didn't win, and the black woman he once dismissed as an interesting challenge had just dismantled the entire equation of his life. 3 days, 3 mornings. Alexander woke up in the perfect penthouse, and Kiara was gone. There is no sound of coffee brewing in the kitchen, no pages turning. There is no trace of lavender in the guest room, only silence, the kind that sat like a stone on the walls, pressing down on every breath between them. He tried texting. "I'm sorry. Can we talk? I don't know why you make me lose control like that." No reply. On the 4th night, Alexander sat alone in front of a screen, displaying an internal email from Vance Capital's public relations team. The upcoming Heart of a Businessman campaign will be built around the family image of Alexander Vance and Kiara Monroe, a wife symbolizing diversity and compassion within modern corporate leadership. He read it again and again. The words were smooth, effective, convincing, and hollow to the core. Alexander stood up, removed his suit jacket, loosened his tie, and left the office. He didn't go back to the penthouse. Instead, he drove destination the Bronx. 9:34 p.m. Light up center. The door was locked, but the office light was still on. He knocked softly. Kiara opened the door. She wore a gray hoodie, her hair slightly messy, and a yellow highlighter still in her hand. Her eyes looked tired, but they didn't avoid his. "What are you doing here?" she asked. Alexander didn't step in. I need to talk. Not as a CEO, not as someone trying to win, just as someone wrong." She stayed where she was, arms crossed, leaning against the door frame. "Then talk." Alexander swallowed. He had never truly apologized to anyone before. He knew how to negotiate, bribe, manage public fallout, and handle crises. But a genuine apology? Never. He began slowly. "I wasn't angry that night because of what you said. I was angry because you were right. I've lived like a giant stage where everything is a role. I don't know how to feel, only how to control. And when you refused to be a prop in that performance, I lost my footing." Kiara didn't speak. She just listened. Her eyes were sharp as blades, but they didn't cut tonight, they saw through. Alexander continued, his voice lower now. "I thought marrying you was part of a game. A bet. I sat in this room 3 weeks ago laughing with Marcus because I'd cleared round 1. But then..." He choked up. "Then I saw you tie a kid's shoelaces at the center. You turned down a diamond necklace and asked me to buy more heaters for the housing block. I saw that you didn't need me. You didn't fear me. You took nothing from me. You just did what you believed was right." Silence. Kiara rested her head against the doorframe. She sighed, then responded, "I don't need you to admit you were wrong. I need you to understand what your mistake took from me." Alexander looked up. "I allowed myself to believe you genuinely wanted to help. I started to think, maybe he's different. But it turns out, I was just another polished PR story." Alexander bowed his head. Then he quietly pulled a USB drive from his jacket pocket. He handed it to her. "What's this?" she asked. "It's the internal contract for the PR campaign. I canceled it, and I sent an email removing your name and image from all Vance Capital media material." Kiara was stunned. He added, "Because if I can't love you honestly, I have no right to use your image to whitewash a lie." She stepped back. "You want me to believe Alexander Vance, the man who only believes in results, just scrapped a $12 million PR campaign?" Alexander shrugged, offering a faint smile. "You may need to rewrite your definition of results. Because living without knowing how to love, I think that's the highest form of bankruptcy." Kiara lowered her head. For the first time, she didn't know whether to be angry or moved. She didn't hug him. I didn't cry. It didn't soften. But she opened the office door and said, "There's a coffee station in the corner, if you want to stay and work." Alexander didn't respond. He stepped inside gently. No power, no suit, no promises. Only one thing in his hands. The beginning of someone honest. 6:15 a.m. It was a freezing Monday morning in the Bronx. Inside the small kitchen behind the light-up center, Alexander Vance, Ivy League graduate billionaire CEO, was stacking cereal boxes on the shelf. No one recognized him as the Wall Street mogul once featured on the cover of Forbes. Because this morning, he wore only a t-shirt and an apron, and quietly followed Kiara's instructions. It had been a week since he showed up late that night, bearing nothing but a sincere confession. Kiara didn't forgive him, but she didn't send him away. So Alexander stayed, not as a contract husband, but as a learner. He came every morning. No private car, no assistant, no meetings. Just a task list: sort food, check inventory, deliver goods to local families, mop floors, take out trash. On the third day, he helped an older woman, Miss Melva, organize the bookshelves in the free reading room. "You new here?" she asked, eyeing his slightly polished shoes. "Yes. Still adjusting," he said. "Getting used to bowing your head, huh?" She chuckled, not bitterly but kindly. Alexander nodded. "I think I need that." On the sixth day, Kiara noticed something strange. Alexander didn't take photos. I didn't post on social media. They never arranged for anyone to accidentally see him doing charity work. She asked, "You're not going to stage a photo op? No accidental press moment to rebuild your brand?" Alexander wiped his sweat, looking up from the sink. "My brand used to be built with cold stone and photoshopped smiles. Now I'm trying to rebuild it with bare hands. No idea if I'm in time." Kiara didn't reply, but her eyes softened, just a little. During his shift, Alexander sat on the warehouse floor one afternoon, drinking from a plastic bottle. A skinny black teenager in a worn-out hoodie walked over. "You're the first white guy I've seen doing volunteer work without acting all noble." Alexander smiled. "I used to be great at acting noble. Not anymore. Now, I'm learning to shut up and listen." The center hosted a free outdoor movie night for the neighborhood kids on Saturday evening. Kiara handled the speakers cords and plastic chairs. Alexander ran around inflating balloons, popping popcorn, and balancing the projection screen with 2 bricks and a broomstick. When the animated film began, the kids cheered. A little girl climbed into Alexander's lap and placed a broken cookie in his hand. "Here, mister, 'cause you look like you don't have anyone to play with." He froze, then smiled, and accepted it like it was the most fantastic prize he'd ever received. After the movie, Kiara saw him sitting on the center's steps, staring into the distance. She walked over and sat beside him. "You okay?" "No," he exhaled. "But for the first time, I can breathe. Not to win, to live." Kiara turned to him, her voice gentle. "I thought you'd quit after 3 days." "So did I," Alexander admitted. "Then what kept you here?" He looked at her. No hesitation. "Because for the first time in my life, I don't want to stand on top. I want to stand beside you, with someone like you. No music, no spotlight. Just the night wind rustles through red brick buildings, and 2 people sitting side by side, once strangers now learning to exist in the same rhythm." The next day, Alexander returned to the offices of Vance Capital. He entered the boardroom without a suit for the first time in a month. He called the executive team together and said something that left the room in stunned silence. "Starting today, 15% of our net profits will go toward community programs. No PR photography or hashtags. If anyone objects, say so." A finance director spoke up. "You're trading profit for emotion." Alexander nodded. "No, I'm trading emotion to reclaim my humanity." An autumn afternoon. Sunlight streamed through the windows of the light-up center. Kiara was reviewing housing assistance files for single mothers in her office when her phone rang. Caller Jasmine, head of community communications. Ms. Kiara, you need to see this right away. What is it? A blog post. It's going viral fast. The article appeared on a popular financial blog accompanied by screenshots of a text conversation between Marcus Alden and an anonymous contact. In the messages, Marcus mentioned bet with Alex about marrying that community chick. Exactly 6 months. If he survives, I'll invest 50 mil. Damn. Didn't think the old fox Vance could play that bold. Hashtags exploded across social media. Bet on love. Marriage. For PR. Kiara. Was a stunt. Not your pawn. 15 minutes later, a second article dropped. Love or a performance CEO. Alexander Vance's marriage was suspected to result from a bet with his best friend. Kiara read it slowly, word by word. Her eyes didn't blink, but her hands clenched the printed page until the edges crumpled. Everything came flooding back. The way Alexander had appeared so deliberately. His unusual insistence. The subtle glances that measured her every reaction in those early weeks. And most of all, the trust she had allowed herself to begin rebuilding. All of it, thrown into a deep, dark well. 20 minutes later, Alexander exited a meeting at the office when his phone began ringing relentlessly. Sophia, his assistant, sounded panicked. The leak's out. Marcus. The messages. The press is already asking questions. Stocks beginning to shift. And Kiara. She's not picking up. Alexander froze. He wasn't surprised the leak had happened. He'd known it was only a matter of time. But what made him tremble were 3 words Kiara's not answering. Without hesitation, he drove straight to Light Up. The door was open, and staff stared in shock as Alexander Vance walked in. No bodyguards, no suit, just a visibly thinner man, dark circles under his eyes, his steps dragging across the floor. Kiara was waiting for him in her office. She didn't stand. I didn't speak first. I just looked at him. Is it true? She asked quietly. Alexander nodded without excuse. Yes, from the beginning. It was a game. At first, yes. He swallowed. But then you weren't part of the plan. You were the first person who made me want to step outside the game. Kiara stood up. Her eyes weren't angry. They were disappointed. Do you know how many offers I've turned down? How many cheap PR invites have I refused? How many times I've been seen as the strong black woman, ripe for exploitation, and yet I chose to trust you. Alexander stepped forward. I was wrong, but everything I've done since here in this community has been real. Real. She gave a bitter laugh. Then why didn't you say something? You had dozens of chances. But you stayed silent. You're not stupid, Alexander. You calculated the timing. You chose to let me find out. Alexander stood frozen. No defense. No justification. Because she was right. So what do you want now? She asked. Not forgiveness, he said, eyes misting. Just a chance to keep doing the right thing. Not as your husband, not as a CEO, just as a man trying to redeem himself. Kiara walked out of the room. No goodbye, no door slam. She left him with the one thing he had never truly known, the silence of someone who once believed in you. The next day, Alexander held a press conference. No floral backdrop, no PR coordinator. He stepped up to the podium, faced dozens of cameras and said, "The marriage between Kiara Monroe and myself began as a bet. But everything that happened after the shame, the awakening was real. I'm not here to ask for forgiveness. I'm here to promise that I will live differently. And if I lose everything because of that, then at least I'll lose it finally knowing who I am." The speech went viral. Some sneered. A clever redemption move. Others were moved. First time a CEO admits guilt without blaming the media. But Kiara didn't read it. She was busy teaching a skills workshop for unemployed youth. Because to her, a real man doesn't fix betrayal with words. He fixes it through actions. Repeated. Day after day. 8:30 a.m. A leaked email. Inside Vance Capital, a chain of emails was anonymously leaked to the press. Not only did it confirm the bet between Alexander and Marcus as real, but it also included internal conversations from the senior PR team. Marcus Alden didn't think it'd last into month 4. The girl's stubborn. Sophia, media assistant. If Kiara leaves after finding out the truth, we still win. Public sympathy will swing to Alex. PR lead prep, the redemption story package. Make him the face of reformed masculinity. The news spread like wildfire. The internet erupted. Hashtags flooded social media platforms, from Twitter to TikTok. Not your redemption. Arc, #Black woman, not your lesson. Kiara Monroe deserves better. 11:00 a.m. Emergency meeting. The entire executive team of Vance Capital gathered. The heads of finance, legal, and external affairs all requested Alexander to step down to cool the media pressure temporarily. But Alexander agreed immediately. I don't need the chairman's seat to do what's right. If the company no longer believes I'm worthy, I may need to learn how to stand outside of power without falling. No one responded. One senior executive lowered his head. For the first time, Alexander didn't fight with speeches, but with quiet dignity. 2:30 p.m. The media surrounded Kiara. Reporters crowded outside the light-up center. Cameras, microphones, and bright lights filled the entrance like it was midday. One journalist asked Ms. Monroe, "Do you accept Alexander Vance's apology?" She replied, "I'm not here to validate or forgive anyone. I'm here to help those still abandoned by the system and the spotlight." 6:00 p.m. A grassroots video went viral. In the video, an older woman voice trembling, "I used to sleep on the sidewalk. Alexander brought me blankets every morning for 3 weeks. A little girl, Mr. Alex, is the only grown-up not scared of our puppy. A young man with a minor criminal record. He didn't ask what I'd done. He just asked, want to start again." The video ended with a single line. "You can start wrong, but no one should be banned from changing." The hashtag #LetChangeBeReal began trending. That evening, Kiara received a message from Lorraine, her longtime mentor. "My dear, some people apologize with tears, some with flowers, and some apologize by clearing the table. So next time they walk in, they don't sit at the center anymore. They're ready to wash dishes in the back." 10:45 p.m. The light-up center door creaked open. Alexander stood there holding a folder of project documents. No flowers, no cameras. Just one sentence: "I found a new investor for the housing program, but they want to meet the director. Not me, you." Kiara looked at him for a long moment. She didn't smile, but she said, "Tomorrow morning, 8:30 sharp. Bring hot coffee, and the proposal, leave the reputation behind." Alexander nodded. "I'll be early." And for the first time since all this began, they no longer looked at each other as debtor and creditor, but as two people sharing a burden, walking the same path, not to win against each other, but to make sure neither one collapses along the way. 8:21 a.m. A Tuesday morning. Alexander Vance stood before the light-up center, holding hot coffee and a stack of documents. He wore a simple button-down shirt. No tie. No name tag. For the first time, he wasn't there to prove he had changed. He was there to keep changing. Kiara Monroe wrote the weekly plan inside the small office on the whiteboard. She didn't look out the window. She wasn't waiting for him. But when she heard the knock, 2 beats A 1-second pause, then one more. She knew it was him. She opened the door. No greeting. She just tilted her head, gesturing for him to come in. The meeting was straightforward. Together they spoke with the investors about a new project building 30 affordable housing units for single-parent families. Alexander didn't interrupt. He didn't name drop. He just listened, took notes, and nodded at the right moments. After the meeting, once the investors had left, Kiara lingered in the hallway and looked at him. "You didn't ask me what we are," she said, her gaze fixed on the notice board in the distance. Alexander looked at her. His voice was steady, deep. "Because I'm not trying to win you back. I want that if one day you return, it's because you choose to not, because I begged." Silence. But this time, it was a warm silence. Kiara turned to him, a soft smile brushing her lips. "You used to be a lesson. Now, maybe a companion." Alexander nodded. He didn't ask for more, because for someone who had once betrayed trust, being allowed to stay was already a gift. In the following months, they worked together. No second wedding. There are no romantic status updates. Just the two of them running job training programs. Alexander meticulously repaired a row of bookshelves. Kiara occasionally sent him a mug of ginger tea when he stayed late. 3 months later, the media was present in full force at the ribbon cutting for Light Up's new housing complex. Not to hunt for headlines, but to hear what those helped had to say. A young mother cried on stage, "If not for this place, my child might have frozen. Now he reads every night and asks me, 'Will there be food tomorrow, Mom?' And now I can say, yes." Alexander stood among the crowd. No one noticed him. He didn't give a speech. He wasn't introduced. But when the ceremony ended, a little boy hugged his leg. "Mister, did you build this house?" Alexander bent down, smiling. "No. I was just invited to help carry the bricks." That afternoon, as he prepared to leave the center, Kiara stood by the door. She handed him a small envelope. Inside was the divorce papers. Signed. Alexander froze. His throat tightened. Kiara said, "We started wrong. We need to end it right so that if we ever begin again, it'll be from a place of truth." He looked at her. No pain, no anger. Only one thing, respect. He nodded and took the envelope. And for the first time, they parted ways, not with drama, not with tragedy, but simply at the right moment. 2 years later, on the official Light Up website, a new section appeared: Business Partnership Program, Ethical Sponsorship. Founder Kiara Monroe, Director Co-Developer Alexander Vance, former CEO, longtime volunteer. A short interview was posted on an independent news page. Journalist: "Have you ever thought about loving someone else?" Alexander: "I don't need to love someone else. I need to learn how to love right if I ever get the chance again." Journalist and her, Alexander smiling. She's still there, leading, resilient, always doing the right thing. As for me, I'm still learning how to walk behind her and not give up. And that is how a reckless bet gave birth to not a love story, but a brand new man.